Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 29th of November. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. First, let's take a look at the Russian sources map. There are four important icons, and I'm talking about the icons that located above Kryvyi Rog. This one, rocket attack, there was explosions in this town. The second one in the town by the name of Dnipro, another a rocket attack. The third one is the attack a little bit to the south from Dnipro in direction of Sinilkovo, this one. And this town is located on the railroad that connects Dnipro, or to be more precise, the western part of Ukraine with the eastern part of Ukraine, and to be more precise, the road that connects Kherson district with the rest of Ukraine. Oh, not like with the east part of Ukraine. And there were hits in direction of Zaporozhye. I'm telling you this because of the fact I would like to develop the situation with the Ukrainian forces in the Kherson district. As you can see, there are still a lot of forces. The day before yesterday, we discussed that the Russians attacked Kryvyi Rog and they shut down one of the most important logistics center, railroad logistics center. And with that attack, the Ukrainians were forced to use the railroads that stick very close to Dnipro to Dnipro River through towns Dnipro and Zaporozhye. Then we got some updates from the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation about the losses among the 17th Tank Brigade. We discussed this yesterday. This brigade, the Ukrainians still couldn't redeploy this brigade. And yesterday in the evening, we got updates from the Russian Telegram channels, from the Ukrainian sources, that there were explosions in these four towns. If we take a look at the Western sources map, we can say that the explosions were in Kryvyi Rog on the railroad. The explosions were in Dnipro on the railroad. The Western source map shows some explosions near Sinildikovo as well, and there were explosions in Zaporozhye, but the Western source map doesn't show us the explosions in Zaporozhye. What does it mean? That means that, as we know, as we discussed yesterday, the Russians have been activated on the eastern front line, pushing the Ukrainians all over the front lines. Now the Ukrainians have the real picture about the main direction of Russian attacks, and the only thing the Ukrainians need is to redeploy their forces that located in Kherson district on the eastern part of Ukraine. But to do this, they have a lot of options to do this, but the shortest one is through Dnipro River, through town Dnipro and Zaporozhye. And they're stuck, they got into trap. The Russians continue controlling this square, this triangle, Kryvyi Rog, Dnipro, Zaporozhye, trying to reduce the Ukrainian forces as much as possible. So, as I told you yesterday, there were at least explosions at 4 places near the railroad and the railroad stations. Today I expected that the Russians would provide us the numbers about those attacks, but they haven't. I believe that they are still calculating the losses, Ukrainian losses, and I'm sure that they will provide us this information tomorrow or the day after, and we are going to see about more updates about the losses among the Ukrainian forces that located in Kherson, that Ukrainians tries to redeploy from this area to this area. But as I told you, this is a very big trap, and I'm not even sure how the Ukrainians are going to solve this issue. The only possible safe road to do this is through Kiev. So let's say from Nikolaev to go to the north and try to cross the Dnipro River somewhere near Kiev or Cherkasy. But this is very far from the front line. Then from Kiev, Cherkasy area, they will be able to go to the south. So they will spend weeks to redeploy these forces. And of course, if there are no more options, of course they will use this option because of what to do else. If we're talking about Kherson district itself, there are no updates. The front lines are stable, just the artillery duels in this area and so on. No updates. If we're talking about Zaporozhye area, there are no updates as well. The situation is completely stable. No movements from both sides, just artillery duels. The same situation near Ugledar. We can say that we discussed Ugledar battle for I believe 3 weeks in a row. But as you can see, these days the front line are stable and calm the situation. But today the head of DPR said that these days the Russians are planning to activate this front line one more time, because, as we discussed, it's very difficult to hold Pavlovka without taking Ugledar, because I believe that Ukrainians have very nice position from Ugledar to pin down and to reduce the Russians in this area. So anyway, they need to continue. Furthermore, as we know, there are very heavy clashes in Marinka. We still haven't received any report about the battle since, I believe, Friday of the previous week. But there are very heavy clashes, and I believe that it always needs some time. It always takes some time before the Russians are able to reduce the Ukrainian forces enough to develop some progress in each town. So I believe that tomorrow, or maybe the day after tomorrow, we are going to receive some updates from Marinka about new progress from the Russian side. So let's follow this situation. If we're talking about Pesky, this front line are silent here. I'm not sure what's going on there and what the Russians are planning to do. So let's see. And I believe that sooner or later we're going to see some updates. Now we are moving to Toretsk-Bakhmut offensive operation. Yesterday we discussed the possible directions of the Russians in this area, and if you remember, yesterday by the evening Kurdyumovka was still under Ukrainian control, but today during the day we got update that Kurdyumovka has fallen and the Russians established final control over this fortification line. So if we take a look at the Western sources map, we see the same updates on this map as well. Like Kurdyumovka almost Azaryanovka, still a part of these towns are under Ukrainian, Andreevka as well, but according to the Russian sources we can update this map, and today there were a lot of confirmations about that. Maybe the Ukrainians still have possibility to push the Russians back, we'll see, but for now this is exactly the area that is under Russian control. So exactly this area, and today almost every single Russian military experts are saying about further plans, the Russian further plans, and most of them today were saying that now the Russians have a very nice opportunity, a very nice possibility to start their attack in direction of village Druzhba and Dachna, this one, to establish some bridgehead in this area and to create, as we discussed yesterday, another additional point of pressure on the Ukrainian forces in Toretsk agglomeration. Of course, more and more sources, Russian military experts, confirms that the next step from the Russians will be to attack Klishchevka, this town, together as close as possible to take this town, and from that moment the Russians will be able to cut or establish very powerful fire control over the road N32, this one that connects Chasov Yar and Bakhmut from Klishchevka. For these purposes as well, everybody confirms that first the Russians need to complete the operation in Opotne, and this is exactly what the Russians are doing right now. And a lot of military experts are saying that one of the possible ways, and of course, as it's not like it would be like kind of a gift if the Russians are able to do this, is to develop some offensive operation in direction of Belagora. So first to Dalivka, and after that to Belagora, and to establish another fire position here that the Russians will be able to use to cut the road between Konstantinovka and New York Toretsk agglomeration. This is it. A lot of military experts are saying that this is a very nice position for the Russians to develop their offensive operation further from this bridgehead to attack or Chasov Yar, or Konstantinovka, or Toretsk New York agglomeration. I don't agree with them. To tell the truth, it's highly unlikely that the Russians are able or are going to use this bridgehead to develop their offensive operation in direction of one of these towns, and mainly because of the fact that even using these positions, the Russians appeared under the crossfire. So if we're talking about the Ukrainians, and if we're talking about this Russian bridgehead, there are worries from their side, but from another side, this is a very nice back, and the Ukrainians are able to using the crossfire to reduce the Russians as much as possible. It will be very difficult to supply and support from this area anyway. And the Russians achieved some benefits from this attack. And to tell the truth, the Russians need to have let's say, if the Russians won't establish control over Bela Gora, Danilivka, Klishevka, these towns, they don't have much time to complete this offensive operation. They need to make breakthrough. They need to penetrate, because if Ukrainians are able to hold this position, to stand strong on this position, from this perspective, this is a very nice position from the Ukrainian side to reduce the Russians as much as possible. There not the distance between towns, and as you can see, Toretsk, Konstantinovka, Chasiv-Yar, Bakhmut is the fortress. Very nice fortifications, and it will be very difficult for the Russians to get the Ukrainians in these towns. But from another side, these small towns are very small villages between fields that are mined, and the Ukrainians do have possibilities to reduce the Russians. So if the Russians take these positions, that means that the next months they need to take control over maybe Chasiv-Yar or maybe Bakhmut, or to make some offensive operation that will penetrate the Ukrainians, and with that attack the Russians will be able to redeploy their main attack fist or main attack forces in any other town, because to keep these fields for months, the Russians won't do this. If, let's say, something happens and the Russians will be defeated during Bakhmut offensive operation or something like this, they will be forced to step back. Believe me, they will step back from these fields on the line of Kurdyumovka, Zaryanovka. Maybe they will be forced to step back even from Klishevka, because of losses that might appear during the long-term storm or offensive operation in this area. This operation, like Toretsk, Konstantinovka, Chasiv-Yar, Bakhmut offensive operation, is almost the same thing as we saw in our Gorsk-Zolotoye area. So as you can see from the Ukrainian side, there is a small back. So the Ukrainians' defense is built like a half circle. You see this, right? And the Russians entered in the middle of the circle. So they're attacked by the Ukrainians, can be attacked by the Ukrainians from every single town, and it's nightmare situation for the Russians, to believe me. And almost the same situation we saw in Gorsk-Zolotoye. As you can see, they were at the same square, this one, and the Ukrainians were defending themselves in this square. This is where their lines, and the Russians were attacking in the middle. And first, what the Russians did, they took control over Novotashkovska and Orekhovo, if you remember, and they established their position right in the middle of this half square. And now we can see almost the same picture. The Russians are attacking, will try to attack in direction Bela Gora, Klishevka, like as close as possible to the Ukrainians' position. They will try to establish their fortification there, and just with one purpose: to pin down the Ukrainians and to attack them with mortars, with artillery, with light infantry that they can, with light artillery weapon that infantry can use without heavy artillery systems. And if you remember the battle for Gorsk-Zolotoye, after that, as soon as the Russians got Orekhovo, they started their offensive operation from the corners. So they were attacking in direction of Toshkovka from the north, and as soon as Toshkovka fell, the Russians managed to collapse entire front line, and from the south, the Russians were attacking in direction of Kamyshevacha. So as soon as the Russians got the corners of this half back, the entire defense has been collapsed immediately. So the same situation the Russians are planning to do here, or at least we can say that this is much bigger system, much complicated system, but from strategic perspective, this is almost the same operation. But the larger towns, the larger amount of army you need, the larger losses both sides are going to have. But anyway, if we compare this situation, we can say that if we're talking about some kind of pattern, the Russians need to attack in direction of Bakhmut, this is the north corner, and the Russians need to attack the south corner. It's New York, Toretsk agglomeration. And if the Russians are able to penetrate these two corners, the entire defense line of Bakhmut, Chasiv-Yar, Konstantinovka, New York agglomeration will be collapsed automatically. So this is the reason why to attack, let's say, from Bela Gora in direction of Konstantinovka is a suicide operation, and nobody is going to do this. But a lot of military experts are saying that the Russians might try to do this, or even there are more updates, like the Russians will try from Klishevka to attack Ivanska, this town that located on the road between Chasiv-Yar and Bakhmut. I don't agree with this situation. I'm sure that we're not going to see something like this. If we see this, I will be very surprised, but I will not be surprised about the losses that the Russians might have during this operation. If we're talking about Charlie Group area, I'm talking about Yakovlevka, Belogorovka, Berestova, Sporna. If you remember, yesterday we discussed that the Russians got control over Sporna, but today we got update from the head of Wagner, from Prigozhin. He said that the Wagners didn't got control over this town. This area is still on the Ukrainians. Maybe they enter some, I don't know, this gas station or maybe some other forest lines, some bushes or something like this, who knows. But for now, this town is still in the Ukrainians and without any progress. If we're talking about entire area, about entire Donetsk battle, so I'm talking about the area from Donetsk to, let's say, Sporna, or maybe a little bit to the south to Sporna, yes, the Ukraine lost around 100 soldiers and something around 11 armored vehicles. This number doesn't include the numbers of losses that the Wagner's group managed to deal to Ukrainian side. Now we are moving to Liman and Kupinsk front line. This is our north situation. As you can see, the same situation, and as you can see, the Russians try to aim the Zhiribets River, the towns that located on Zhiribets River. Tarskoye, Terny, Makeivka. If you take a look at the Western sources map, this map shows the perfect picture. Zarechno, Tarskoye, Makeivka, and Terny. So as you can see, the Russians attacked exactly the logistic areas where the Ukrainians managed to establish pontoon bridges, some kind of crossings area that they used to cross from one side of Zhiribets River to the Russian side. The Russians, all these positions is under complete Russian fire. They don't need even to target or to aim in this area because artillery have been aimed or targeted, I don't know, for a very long time ago. So they don't even need to know if they're Ukrainians or not. They just need to know the time when they need to start attack, and anyway they will get their enemy. As a result of the clashes near Liman from this area when the Ukrainians were trying to, let's say, collect some forces to start some offensive operation in direction of Chervonopopovka, Kremenna, and so on, the Ukraine lost around 40 soldiers and something around 6 armored vehicles. If we're talking about the north, the Ukrainians decided to change a little bit the geography of their attacks. If you remember, they used to attack in direction of Novoselsky, but I believe that the Ukrainians decided to give up in this situation because they spent a lot of time storming this area, they spent a lot of manpower, and now, as we discussed some videos ago, they decided to make a little bit hook in the north, trying to get on the line of Nizhny Dunka, trying to encircle or to pass this area from the north, and they were attacking in the direction of Yagodno from Ivanovka. And as a result of that attacks, the Ukraine lost around 30 soldiers and something around 4 armored vehicles. As you can see, no progress from the Ukrainian side. For now, the Ukrainians, to tell the truth, they don't need any progress on the ground. While the Russians attack, it's better to stand in defense and try to repulse all the Russians' attack. The main goal, the main object that the Ukrainians need to achieve during the winter military campaign, the military phase, is to redeploy the forces that are stuck in Kherson. Because while the Ukrainians are doing this, and while the Ukrainians haven't completed this mission of redeployment, the Russians have significant success and significant, they have more forces, they have more manpower, they have more forces, they have more shells, more ammunition to attack, and they're using this situation. Because as soon as the Ukrainians redeploy these forces, I believe that the Russians will be forced to stop, and then they will try to find another solution. But this is not something like the Russians opened their eyes this morning and decided, let's try to do this. No, that was planned. This is the plan, and they will try to slow down the Ukrainians as much as possible, trying to destroy them in Kryvyi Rog, Nikopol, Dnipro, Zaporozhye. They will try to destroy them, and I believe even if the Ukrainians will try someday to use the wider hook trying to cross the Dnieper River somewhere in the north, the Russians will attack the energy facility trying to reduce the Ukrainian possibility in this case. So this is like some kind of plan, a very good plan. It's very difficult to implement, believe me, from the Russian side, but this is like Military, is this some kind of art? Military art. This is it, when you're forcing your enemy to do exactly as you want, because you know that if you do this, he will be attacked by the Russians from the other side. The Ukrainians don't have any other options. I'm not saying that if the Ukrainians use these roads, they will use completely entire army from the south. But I believe that the Russians are able to reduce the Ukrainians up to 30% of the forces, at least of vehicles, armored vehicles, and tanks, artillery system that locate in the south during the migration process. I believe that they are able to do this, and this is a very big number. If you remember that when the Russians left this bank of the river, they had around 5,000 units of armored vehicles and tanks on this bank of the river. So I believe the Ukrainians had almost the same number. So if you're talking about 30%, that means that 1,500 armored vehicles the Russians are able to destroy during this migration process. And of course, this it's highly unlikely the Ukrainians wants to have such a losses, even by the cost of losing of Bakhmut. I'm not sure what is more important for the Ukrainians, to save 1,500 vehicles or to lose Bakhmut. I can't tell you what is better for the Ukrainians. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you, can condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon. Have a good day. Bye bye.